In the field of new and renewable sources of energy, especially electric vehicles, the big news last several weeks has been the filing for bankruptcy of Northvolt. Here's a company that's supposed to be the star or the darling of Europe and the United States in developing electric vehicles for their markets, the battery manufacturer Northvolt in Sweden. Now, after burning $15 billion, it's filing for bankruptcy. This is what happens when you go against the flow of manufacturing, go against the flow of globalization, go against the flow of seeking higher efficiency just for political purposes. No question in the sector today, the two leaders, CATL of China and BYD of China, are dominating the battery sector. The battery sector is more than electric vehicles, of course, because very soon, with all the solar power plants being put up around the world, what happens when the sun isn't shining? You need industrial scale energy storage, which means, again, big size batteries. So these two companies, together with a number of other smaller companies in China, are getting into the industrial scale energy storage systems, which the big solar plants, the solar power stations will need to make sure that you have power at night. This is really very interesting what's happened, because if you really look at the progress of Northvolt over the last 8 years, it's been failure after failure in terms of not being able to catch up on technology against the Chinese players, and also, as a result, not being able to help advance electric vehicles in these countries, namely in Western Europe and the United States. 8 years they tried. There have been accidents, there have been fires, there have been all kinds of problems in the development. Meanwhile, CATL and BYD continue to blossom, continue to do well and expand, and they're both starting to build plants worldwide. What we see in Europe, actually, in the US also. In the US, it's been happening for quite some time. It's been deindustrialization, lack of competitiveness. And this is an example of how this has happened over the last decade. High labor costs, high energy costs. When you can have cheap natural gas from Russia through pipes, you end up buying LNG, much more expensive, hundreds of % higher, instead of using the cheap natural gas one, because of the so-called Russian-Ukraine conflict. This is self-destruction. In addition to that, labor cost is several-fold of that of China or that of Asia in general. So what happens? High labor costs, high raw material costs, high energy costs. They were able to dominate maybe 20 years ago in a number of sectors of manufacturing because of advanced technology. But China has caught up on technology. If you catch up on technology, you have much more efficient supply chain, you have reasonable energy prices, you have reasonable labor costs. You cannot compete if you are in Europe. This is what we're beginning to see. What happened with Northvolt is just one example of the deindustrialization of Europe. It's very unfortunate. There has to be some fairly fundamental transformation in Europe to be able to restore their position on the global manufacturing stage.